And you're welcome back to the polls. Of course, a special coverage of that proceeding in Parliament with regard to the calls for a vote of censure on the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. Well, the man himself has appeared before that 8-member ad hoc committee. And here's what we found out, that the Finance Minister is fighting back, first of all, on claims by the minority that he is incompetent and has mismanaged the Ghanaian economy and is the cause of the current economic hardship. While taking his turn before the 8-member ad hoc committee probing the matter, the minority side, which is definitely kicking against the, actually pushing for the censure of the minister. He is described, first of all, as unfortunate, claims that he's not performed creditably. He also claims that issues relating to the fact that he's not managed the economy since 2017 well are unfortunate. We can just take a listen to excerpts of that initial statement by the Finance Minister.
Proponents. Indeed, the Attorney General issued an opinion on 6 January 2022 that the National Cathedral is a state-owned company limited by guarantee under the Ghana Museums and Monuments Board. Honorable Co-Chairs, the policy direction and updates on the National Cathedral have been publicly presented over the years through the National Budget Statement and Economic Policy presented to Parliament. In paragraph 158 of my budget speech on the 2019 Budget Statement Economic Policy, I announced on the floor of Parliament government's vision for the National Cathedral, as well as a commitment to facilitate the construction by providing the land, the secretariat, and seed money. This subject was part of the policy approval of the budget after the extensive debate. Subsequently, regular updates on the progress of the construction of the National Cathedral have been provided to Parliament and the nation. These include 2020 Budget Statement Economic Policy, paragraph 385, which announced the establishment of the Board of Trustees and Secretariat for the cathedrals. Mid-year review of the 2020 Budget Statement, paragraph 279, which provided an update on the groundbreaking ceremony held on 5th March 2020, to mark the formal commencement of the construction phase of the project. 2021 Budget Statement Economic Policy, paragraphs 1132 and 1134, which informed the House of the letter of intent signed on 25th November 2020 between the National Cathedral of Ghana trustees and Ribad JV, led by Rizani, Babisoti and Sons and Desimoni, and also the appointment of Apostle Professor Opoku Nyina as new chairman of the Board of Trustees on 8 February 2021. The mid-year review of the 2021 Budget Statement, paragraphs 354 and 355, which announced the expansion of the Cathedral project to include a Bible Museum of Africa, and Biblical Gardens, as well as the establishment of the 100 cedi a month Ketua Beer and Sweat Club, in line with the original plan to encourage as many donors as possible to contribute towards the establishment of this national monument. In conclusion, Co-Chairs, all the payments made for the National Cathedral were lawfully done and from the contingency vote under the other government obligations vote, and not from the contingency fund, as alleged by the proponents.
Hold it, Mr. Minister. Hold it a minute. Let's come. I don't worry if you become privy to what we discussed. We're wondering whether at this stage we should ask you questions after you finish with the first allegation, or let you finish with the lot. I think the consensus is that finish with your presentation and then we'll ask questions if we do have any.
Thank you very much, and I'll also submit the Attorney General's opinion on that. Thank you very much. I will go through all the grounds and then we can focus on the questions.
So, Honorable Minister, you have to go to ground 4. Ground 4. Deliberate and dishonest misreporting of economic data to Parliament.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Let me now focus on the grounds claiming deliberate and dishonest misreporting of economic data to Parliament. The issue of deliberate misreporting of economic data to Parliament is not just unfortunate, but simply untrue. I, and for that matter, the Ministry of Finance, have never misreported data to Parliament, as has been alleged. On Tuesday, 13th November 2022, the proponents clarified that their concerns relating to the reporting of fiscal data. In their submission, they alleged that different sets of data were presented to the IMF and the people of Ghana. That is untrue. The 2019 Article 4, which they cited, actually clearly demonstrates that the computing and reporting of the deficit is consistent between the government and the IMF, as shown on the table labeled Ghana Selected Economic and Financial Indicators, 2017 to 2024, on page 4 of the IMF Article 4 and Appendix 3A of the 2019 budget. More importantly, we were under a fund program during that period and could not have been able to exit the program if there were inaccuracies with the data we reported and the methodology used for computing the deficit. In actual fact, in the most recent IMF Article 4 report from 2021, one sees clearly demonstrated that the methodology utilized in computing the deficit is and has been consistent, as shown in the tables labeled Ghana Selected Economic Financial Indicators 2019 to 22 on page 3 of the press release numbered PR 21/221. According to Honorable Attoforsen, Mr. Chairman, paragraph 16, page 11, I'm quoting of the staff report, Article 4 says fiscal rules under Ghana. Public Financial Management Act fiscal rules could be strengthened, box 1. It goes on to say that about 2.8 percentage point of GDP in financial energy sector payments were recorded below the line in the year 2019 budget because the government considers the financial sector cost as a one-off and energy cost as a debt amortization.
Well, aspects of what it is that the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, has been indicating in Parliament. Time now to cross you over. Let's get some more reactions. Parliamentary correspondent Kweku Asante is joining us now with the latest on this. And Kweku, we had the Finance Minister there challenging the position of the minority that indeed there was misreporting of the figures. Beyond that as well, he's also unhappy about how the minority is describing him as being incompetent. What's the mood right now in Parliament with regard to all that has transpired so far?
So, Blessed, it's been a very interesting day in Parliament with the Finance Minister coming in to respond to all the grounds for which the minority are basing their censure motion on. Initially, there were 7 of them, but as you may know now, the committee has struck out 2 of them, leaving 5 having to do with National Cathedral, the grounds having to do with gross mismanagement, incompetence, among others. So it's been an interesting encounter with the committee members asking questions of the Finance Minister, the specific issues that he's been relating to. But let me run to you a number of the things he said. The Finance Minister admits that the economic difficulty is tough, that Ghanaians are suffering. He does not accept responsibility, although he says that he is very sorry that Ghanaians have had to go through such difficult times. He also says that on the National Cathedral, which formed the second ground of the minority's claims against him, he said that he had not unlawfully or unconstitutionally, as the minority would want Ghanaians to believe, released funds for the construction of that edifice, and that indeed the amount of money which the minority say total about 200 million cedis came from the contingency fund, the contingency vote, and that it wasn't as though he woke up one morning, decided that he was just going to withdraw money from state coffers for the National Cathedral. So that has to do with the National Cathedral. On the allegations that he has been deliberate and dishonest in reporting economic data, the minister says this allegation is unfortunate and that it's also untrue, and that despite there being some differences in how he has reported data to the Parliament of Ghana, as well as the IMF and other international bodies, it was simply a matter of style, and that over the time they've decided now to align these reporting data, that it cannot be true, as some would want Ghanaians to believe that he's just being deliberate and dishonest in reporting some of these data. We also know that the minorities say that the minister has engaged in fiscal recklessness, leading to the crash of the Ghana cedi. He says that he has not been reckless at all, and the crux of the answer on this ground is that the Bank of Ghana has the primary responsibility to manage the cedi. Although they play a certain collaborative role, it is not the primary duty of the finance ministry to be managing this. Indeed, later on when it came to the questions and answers, you heard there from Dr. Dominic Ayine, who is co-chair of the committee, insist that, listen, it cannot just be the Bank of Ghana. The finance ministry has a crucial role to play in this. The finance minister admitted that something of that sort is true, but obviously he wants to say that the Bank of Ghana has some sort of blame to take or some more responsibility to bear. The other two grounds relate to alarming incompetence, and that is why you heard the finance minister say that those were very strong words. He didn't think that the minority should be making such allegations against him. Later on, we heard from minority MP Ofori-Atta who said that in 2014, this same Minister of Finance actually engaged in a lecture where he said that a coup could happen in Ghana due to the economic difficulties. He sought to say that if he would suggest that a coup will happen in Ghana, then it should not have any challenge at all with the minority saying that he has been incompetent. Also on the ground 7 of economic gross mismanagement, the minister has also been denying this. So all in all, 5 grounds that the minister has specifically been asked to respond to because of the striking out of the other 2 grounds. The minister says those grounds are completely false and that they should not hold any water. You've heard from some of the members of the committee asking questions of Ofori-Atta. Indeed, Bernard Ahia for the MP for Akachi South have been asking some questions. He's been seeking to put to the finance minister that there's some sort of difference between a contingency fund and a contingency vote, and simply because there's some form of budget for a contingency vote in a budget of a year, it does not give the finance minister a carte blanche to just go in there and be withdrawing money from the account without coming to Parliament for approval. So the mood has been tense sometimes, but the minister has had some sort of solid background. We've heard from very senior ministers in the Akufo-Addo cabinet, the defense minister, the local government minister, the Meknitiwo, as well as Dan Botwe, who are here. And the chief of staff herself was also here to offer some sort of solidarity to the minister, as well as chiefs from the Achime-Buaka traditional area who have all been here to offer support to the minister.
Obviously, we know that there are some outstanding areas for us to cover. Let's run through that quickly, the issues that we're expecting the finance minister to address.
So the minister has substantively addressed all the 5 key issues, but the questioning for now has had to do with the National Cathedral, as well as the deliberate and dishonest reporting of economic data. So MPs on the committee have been able to ask questions on these 2 grounds, but when they come back from this 1-hour break that they've taken, they have to deal with the fiscal recklessness leading to the crash of the Ghana cedi, alarming incompetence, gross mismanagement. These questions are expected to drag on because the committee will return around 4 o'clock, could drag on past 6 and all that. So these are all questions that the committee members will be putting to the minister. But just as you've seen, the NPP members of the committee have not had much of some so-called and unquote tough questions. Indeed, in the words of Dr. Dominic Ayine, they've been asking what he called leading questions. It has been the minority MPs on the committee, Ofori-Atta, Dr. Zaneto Ajeman Rawlings, Dr. Dominic Ayine himself, and then Mr. Bernard Ahia, who have been trying to press the minister to make certain admissions. The minister is clear he is not making any such admissions, and that in his view he has been competent in managing the economy. Although he admits there's been some challenges, it is not true that he is not fit to lead the finance ministry, and he is justifying why he must continue to stay in office as finance minister.
At this point, I want to bring in the former chair of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC chair, and talking about Dr. Steve Mantea, who's joining us via phone. But one more issue quickly before you leave us. Obviously, this issue about the co-chair situation is beginning to prompt a lot of response even on social media. I'm sure that you've been going through some of the comments online, noticing what's been happening between the chairperson, Katie Hammond, and his co-chair, Dominic Ayini. Well, it appears we've lost Kwekwe there. And just yesterday as well, it was the turn of the likes of JNPC to provide some clarity on the whereabouts of $100 million worth of interest that is accruing out of some of our petroleum funding. Of course, a lot of questions as to how come JOHL is dealing in an offshore location. And these are issues that came up as well. Let's bring in Dr. Steve Mantea, who will help us analyze all of this. Doc, thank you for your time here on The Pulse. So let's start off with what transpired today. The finance minister is first of all starting by apologizing. He says, I'm sorry. Well, we're not sure the context in which he's putting that out, but listening clearly to the finance minister, what's your impression about his apology?
Well, thank you very much. I guess he's apologizing to us for the effect of his own management of the economy and the hardship it's put all of us through. Which for me is the basis for the hearing that is currently ongoing. If one is to accept such an apology, then of course it will mean that once you admit that you put all of us through hardship, then the honorable thing to do is to bow out. In fact, we needed to go through this long process of trying to get him out. Reason is that a vote of censure is basically a vote of no confidence. And so if the outcome of your economic management is what we are feeling today, and clearly all Ghanaians are not happy about this outcome, then of course we'll have no confidence in your management of the economy, and therefore a vote of confidence, if the majority had actually well, what do you call it, cooperated with the minorities, we shouldn't have gone through this long route. We just have voted and then get them out. I think what we are doing currently seems like a secret, and I'm not too sure where we are heading. After all these processes, what next? Are we going to vote or not? And is the majority going to come along or not? If they are not going to come along, then of course we are back to and what you call it, ground zero, and we spend time that could have been used in a more beneficial way.
And we'll get back to some of the controversial issues the finance minister has been touching on with regard to the National Cathedral and other projects. But what's of interest to you as well as what transpired yesterday? We had the position of the GMPC, for instance, on JOHL funding, which cannot be accounted for. You've been listening to the justification from GNPC that, well, its subsidiary have that entitlement to hold on to the funds and not necessarily pay into our petroleum holding fund. So what do you make of that justification in the first place? Well,
I side with PIAC in their determination that the Petroleum Revenue Management Act was breached by GMPC with the collaboration of the Ministry of Finance, because the PRMA is clear, and because it didn't want to leave in a doubt, the provision in question said all oil revenues earned directly or indirectly. So no matter how these revenues were derived, either directly to GNPC or through proxy, they are to be first deposited in the Petroleum Holdings Fund before any disbursement can be made. Let me say that we've come to this point because GNPC has for some time now been making demands for revenue recognition in their books. Now, yesterday as I listened, I saw an attempt by Katie Hammond to draw us into PNDC Law 64. Indeed, PNDC Law 64 and the import ATM was trying to put across is that GNPC is at liberty to create subsidiaries. And indeed, GNPC has subsidiaries. In the upstream oil sector, it has Escrow and it has Gospel, both of which exist only on paper. They don't have an office, they don't have staff, and currently I think they are being supposedly housed within GNPC's own establishment. Okay, and then you get involved in the transaction, which involves the acquisition of some 7%. Let me say that that 7% was not for JOHL. That 7% is an additional participating interest that accrues to the Republic of Ghana. And because PNDC Law 64 actually makes GNPC the custodian of our petroleum reserves and our representative, commercial representative in the oil business, the 7% was assigned to GNPC. And GNPC has a responsibility to account for that 7% directly to the Petroleum Holding Fund. Instead, they created, in collaboration with Occidental, that actually sold the shares, set up a new company with just two directors, CEO and board chair, and then transferred the proceeds of the oil lifting in respect of the 7% into the account of JOHL, which is held offshore. Okay, and then the argument they are making is that JOHL is an independent entity from GNPC, so it has to trade, do business, and at the end of the year, pay dividends to GNPC. Now, the question I ask is that where in the work program of GNPC for 2022 did they indicate that they were going to create a company? And how were they going to capitalize that company? And did they get parliamentary approval as required by law for these actions?
Well, the contention yesterday is that it's part of their work schedule.
Yes, but all their work schedule are supposed to be approved by Parliament. And I will tell you on authority that the creation of JOHL was not part of the work program. Okay,
but I guess that will not be, for instance, the fault of GNPC, because that will be a matter of policy. So lies squarely at the ministerial level. Is that where you're tying in the finance minister?
Yes, it was done in collaboration with the finance ministry. But the point I make here is this. There has been an occasion when GNPC sold oil in the name of the Republic and deposited the proceeds into GNPC's own account. Now, the Ministry of Finance wrote to GNPC on that occasion and asked GNPC to transfer the money immediately into the Petroleum Holding Fund. What has changed? Now, at that point, when this happened, GNPC made the argument that, and they were right, that if you look at the statutes of establishment of GNPC, they are not supposed to be spent on the government budget. That is, allocating a portion of petroleum revenues to cover the operation. No, that was not the intention. If you look at Law 64, GNPC was supposed to raise money from the open capital market, finance the operations, make profits, and pay dividends to the state. But the PRMA, for some reason that cannot be explained, actually created a provision that GNPC will be allocated some petroleum revenues up until 2026. And then GNPC will go on its own and fund its operations. However, and GNPC's response to this is that, look, if we have to go on our own from 2026, then we need to be able to dress our books. And so we need revenue recognition. So all the discussion we're having is nothing short of the stated position of GNPC for some years now that they need revenue recognition. And they are trying to use technicality to get around it.
And so going forward, how then do we demand accountability from the minister? Because the minister has also pointed out clearly that, and we've heard him talk about that today, that when it comes to the GNPC's transaction, he has no hands in that. So when a case where we're seeing the back and forth between GNPC and the ministry, who should we be holding accountable at this point?
We should be holding the finance minister and GNPC severally accountable. And let me explain. I don't think the parliamentary committee has done a very good job on this particular issue. The breaches of a law occurred first and foremost when the finance minister, and as he indicated, granted a loan to GNPC to acquire the 7%. The finance minister does not have the power, so to say, to grant loans without parliamentary approval. And there is no evidence to suggest that prior to granting GNPC this loan, the minister sought parliamentary approval. And there is also no indication that, indeed, this loan that was advanced to GNPC was part of the GNPC's work program that was approved by Parliament at the beginning of the year. So that constitutes a breach. If the minister did not seek parliamentary approval prior to advancing a loan to GNPC. Again, I've sought to find out if there is a loan agreement. I'm yet to see the loan agreement and the terms of repayment of this loan.
So on now to some other issues, because it appears that it's not just the petroleum fund that's at stake here. There are issues relating to, for instance, such a priority project like the National Cathedral. The finance minister at least providing us some sense, admitting first of all that indeed some payments were made out of contingency. That's the whole explanation coming through from the finance minister as to whether or not it's constitutional or otherwise. The lawyers prefer that we leave that to the court. But looking at the fact that the finance minister is giving us a clear sense, at least for once, on what government's position is on the National Cathedral project, do you see a sharp departure from the statement he made earlier that this is a project that was going to be funded largely by, the religious groupings?
Yeah, of course, there's a clear departure there. But even quite apart from that, there are constitutional issues that this response raises, and that takes us into the constitutional realm and the grounds upon which disbursements can be made from the contingency fund. Let me say that the contingency fund itself is a creation of the Constitution. For years, since 1992, we never put a cedi in the contingency fund, such that when we're hit by disaster, you remember the Circle fire outbreak, there was nothing in the contingency fund to help deal with the situation and to pay compensation to victims. And so the previous government, the NDC administration, decided that they will operationalize the contingency fund and put some money into it. Subsequently, when the DRMA was amended, it was decided that the Minister of Finance will be given the discretion to cap the stabilization fund, and the excess over the cap will be put into the contingency fund and the sinking fund. Now, the sinking fund actually was set up for the purposes of debt servicing. Over the years, when this amendment was done, nothing was put into the contingency fund. Each time the stabilization fund was tapped, all the monies were dreamed of and put into the sinking fund to feed into our appetite to borrow. And it is the borrowing that has brought us where we are today. So how come now we are citing contingency funds as where we drew the money? And we need to look into whether or not that is permissible under the Constitution.
We're not getting a clear sense. We're not getting a clear sense as to
national disaster or emergency that requires drawing money from the contingency fund.
But for now, there's no clear direction. At least the minister has not mentioned that as to whether or not government will continue to draw a substantive budget for the National Cathedral project. But should we continue drawing funds from contingency just to support the National Cathedral?
My brother, the essence and purpose of the contingency fund is not to build churches. These are monies we set aside for use in times of emergency, when we are hit by national disaster, such as happened during the heavy rainfall that set fire affected. So how can you, on what grounds, do you classify cathedral a national emergency? That's a question. I don't think there is any basis for continuing to withdraw money from the contingency fund. Otherwise, the day will be hit by disaster, will be found wanting.
And of course, we're expecting that the House will resume activities in less than 20 minutes from now. What's your assessment, overall assessment of what it is that the Finance Minister has provided in terms of his justification as to whether or not he should remain in office?
Well, I'm pretty surprised that the Finance Minister is allowing himself to be taken through this grilling process. I'm not too sure what is at stake and what is preventing him to bow out. Because it's not just the members of parliament who are asking for his exit. In fact, all Ghanaians, the general mood of the country is that everybody wants him out. And I'm pretty sure that if indeed he does the honorable thing to buy out, there is a way in which we'll get some renewed confidence into the economy. Believe me, the dollar will immediately, the city will immediately regain some strength, and people will be very hopeful and will have some faith in the future. As it is now, his resistance to calls for its exit is not helping the economy, and especially the currency market.
I thought that would have been the last one, but we can't go away if I don't ask you on the issue of incompetence. The Finance Minister appears to be having challenges with the description. He says, well, it's becoming personal, more or less.
I don't think the word incompetence is new in our political lexicon in this country. I think the person who has the proprietary right over the use of that word is the current Vice President, who consistently described the then Finance Minister, Mr. Atta, as incompetent. And so, as we say in P, it serves as an example. You need to treat others the way you want to be treated. And so, if you did not protest when a certain Finance Minister was being described as incompetent, then you have no reason to protest when you also described in the same manner.
But that's one of the grounds on which the minority believes he should be removed. On clear grounds or on economic grounds, can we say, going by the figures, that Ken Ofori-Atta indeed has been incompetent?
Yes, I recall 3 times the IMF cautioned Ghana about our borrowing and that we're heading towards debt unsustainability. And so, if for me, and I keep making the point that if managing economy is all about just borrowing to come and spend, then any stupid fool, excuse my language, can be a finance minister. I think there's much more to economic management than just borrowing. And I think we haven't done the even the way we've managed the foreign exchange in this country. We've always been looking only in one direction, the supply side. So when we don't have enough dollars in the economy, all we do is to go and borrow dollars and come and pour into the economy. That is not a sustainable way of managing your currency. You need to also look at the demand side. I see no reason why we cannot regulate, for instance, the repatriation of profit by the service companies. Take, for instance, the mobile phone companies. They don't bring dollars into the economy. They just bring the equipment, and they provide their services, and we pay in cedis. And then they make a lot of profit, and they repatriate this profit by changing the cedis into dollars and taking them away. That puts a lot of pressure on the local currency. And so if I were finance minister, I would look at the demand side. I mean, the pressures on the dollar. And what I would do is, for instance, say, hey, you cannot, for instance, take all your profit out of the economy at a go. I'll say, for instance, given the circumstances we find ourselves today, this year you are being allowed to take only 50% of your profit. The rest can be taken care of in the next year when things normalize. Again, you also want to ensure that unnecessary imports that are brought into the country are also curtailed or limited. Of course, I do not fully support what has been announced now by the Bank of Ghana, but it's a step in the right direction in a way, just that it's targeting the wrong product and it will lead to escalation of prices. I would have toothpick, yes, there's no reason to provide forex for toothpick, handkerchiefs, second-hand clothing of certain size and all that. So you need to be very targeted. While you want to control the import, you also want to be mindful of the control measures and their impact on the poverty situation in the country. Currently, food prices are very high, and so to include items like poultry, rice, and oil is not a very good measure. Perhaps you want to target that into the next year, next 2 years, and before you introduce such a program, you must have in place mechanisms for addressing the supply gap that may arise as a result of the implementation of these measures. So economic management really takes much more. It's actually an integrated approach that is required, and not just borrowing some and spend every time you go into financial difficulties or there's pressure on the local currency.
And I'm just picking up on what you said earlier about the 8-member ad hoc committee not doing a thorough job. Would you want to extend that to particularly the leadership of the committee? Lots of reactions on this unique co-chair situation that we're seeing, and how, of course, the Honourable Katie Hammond keeps having issues with his co-chair, Dominic Ayine, and Dominic Ayine saying, just pointing out to quote that word of, describing Katie Hammond as an NPP co-chair. These are some of the developments where Ghanaians believe, well, we need to do a lot more in trying to get the job done.
Well, it's clear from the behavior, particularly of Katie Hammond and the interjections and attempts to sometimes curtail the flow of the presentation of the witnesses and all that. For me, smacks of an attempt to really shield somebody, and in this case, I think I will not mince words, shield the finance minister. That is not very healthy.
Dr. Steve Manteo, I guess would have to leave it here. We'll wait as the committee resumes sitting, but we wish you well. Thank you for joining us here on The Pulse. We're still paying it.